Hey guys, what's going on? Carter here. Well, there's been a number of videos floating around YouTube kind of talking about the knife aftermarket. You know, if people that flip knives are good, if they're evil, just a few ideas going around. Is it a bubble? Things like that. So it's really exciting to talk about this kind of stuff. I love talking about this kind of stuff. So here we go. I want to address a few points. I'm going to do it as quickly as possible. First off, is it a bubble? Are we in a knife bubble? I believe that we are. You know, like a lot of things, anything that gets popular, it generally doesn't, follow just a straight linear path. It goes up, it goes down, sometimes in big, huge ups and downs, and sometimes little ones within the big one. It gets pretty complex. But just the years that I've been into the knife world, I've seen it grow astronomically. Especially the custom knife world, things like that. Makers are coming out of the woodwork. So many people are getting into it because it's so popular. It's lucrative. It's hitting kind of a cultural level it hasn't been in since I've been into knives, and you see that trickle down into production knives. We're seeing so much more being implemented in terms of materials and quality. I mean, you've got like production knives that have bearing systems and Damascus and exotic steels, titanium frame locks. This stuff wasn't around back in the day, especially not in the number that it is now. Production knives back in the day were generally just utilitarian. They didn't really implement any of this kind of visual aesthetic or, you know what I'm trying to say, kind of some of the textures we're playing with now. And now you've got companies like Kershaw putting these out. You've got Spyderco doing stonewashed titanium frame locks with bearings. This is all kind of trickling down, and it kind of starts with the custom makers, which, once again, are growing like crazy. You're seeing guys that have never made a knife before making big dog money, and I mean, real money on their first run of knives and selling out oftentimes before anybody even gets them in their hand. Somebody will just make a prototype, they'll make a video, and they'll say, I'm going to make 10 knives and $500 a piece, and they will sell out of all those knives. You never would have seen that. This person would have had to pay their dues. They probably would have lost money while they're trying to make knives, trying to gain a following, popularity. But the market is so much larger now. There's so many more people into it, and jumping on these new makers is a good way to kind of get in ahead of the curve, get these knives before they blow up and their books get closed and things like that. And you never would have seen that years ago. You've also got bubbles like Rick Hinderer, which is like a micro bubble. And I predicted this like a year and a half ago, that the prices would come back to normal. A lot of people didn't agree with me. They just saw them going up, up, and up. And the main thing that cued me off as to why this would happen is the motivation of the maker. Rick Hinderer has never wanted an exclusive knife. He's always wanted to get his knife in as many people's hands as possible. And the only limiting factor was employees, space, equipment, logistics, things like that. So I knew that he would continue to expand and grow and increase his output. And then, simultaneously, there's always a little bit of, hype, people, everybody, flavor of the year, Rick Hinderer, and that does kind of die down a little bit, and a lot of the people that really loved his stuff, they picked up a few of his knives, and they've kind of moved on to other makers and things. But mostly it's his production. I know he's increased his production, and he's doing what he said he would do. He's increasing the amount of knives to try and meet demand. And as that happens, his knives are going to come down in price, which is a good thing for most people. The only people that are kind of hurting from it are folks that maybe paid $1,400 for a XM24 a year and a half ago, and now they're trying to sell to get their money back, and they're struggling, and they may have to take a loss on it, and that's kind of what happens. Conversely, you're not going to see that same thing apply to custom makers, because they are going to be limited by what they can do. They can't make a bunch of knives all the time. They only make so many per year, and depending on how popular they are, their books are going to be closed or they're going to be backlogged. And as far as flipping those knives or those knives going for more money, you know, it's one of those good or bad things, or it's one of those it is what it is and kind of bad things. Somebody mentioned that maybe it'd be a good idea for the makers to charge more if they saw that their knives were going for like $4,000 and they charge $1,000. If they were to charge $3,000, you know, that way the money would be going to the maker rather than to dealers or to people flipping or things like that. You know, that isn't logistically possible really, because what drives this price increase is time. You're paying for people's time. If you put an order in with a maker and it takes 1.5 years to get that knife, that is time that you've vested into that knife, into that maker. That's money that you've had to hold aside, knowing that that charge is coming up, especially if you got to pay in advance, like Medford. He makes you pay for the knife in advance. So you tie that money up. You pay Medford. You're not getting interest on that knife. You can't, or I'm sorry, you're not getting interest on that money. You can't invest that money. You can't have that money available in case an emergency happens. And that costs, you know, that's a cost to that knife. So you get that knife, if you go to sell it, that amount of time that you had that money tied up, that investment, that's worth something. That is worth money right there. And so the big draw is, you know, you have to, if you want that knife in your hand right now, you got to pay for it. You know, if you have 1.5 years that you can sit and wait, then yeah, you can get that knife cheaper. You can get on the books, hopefully, of a maker, and you can wait 1.5 years, 2 years, whatever the wait is, and you'll get that knife at cost. But if you want that knife overnighted to you tomorrow, you're going to pay for that. And it kind of just, it is what it is. If the makers started charging $3,000 instead of $1,000, then the aftermarket would soar that much higher, you know, relative to what the cost is. You know, it is what it is. You're always going to be paying for people's time, and you're going to be paying extra money to cut ahead of the line, so to speak. You know, and conversely, there is kind of that dark side when people kind of, I don't want to say abuse, but they kind of work the system so that they can get these knives at cost and then you know, flip them, and that's really their only goal. It's not that they get the knife and they decide they got to sell it. You know, they go to knife shows, they get friends to get lottery numbers and call in and, you know, do this and that. They get their whole building. You know, if it's a knife dealer and they've got 50 employees, they get all 50 employees to put in for these knives, and yeah, you know, of course they're going to get the majority, the lion's share, and then they immediately turn it and flip it. And you can go even further by abusing exclusives, you know, by kind of bum rushing a certain maker and making sure that you get 90% of a certain maker and somewhat creating an artificial bubble. It happens. I've seen it happen with certain knives. I'm not going to name which ones they are, where, and you know, part of this might just be me, but when they first came out and they were cheaper, you know, they were all right, but I wasn't all that impressed. And somehow this crazy market has developed, and they're going for these insane prices, and I can't wrap my head around why. They're not customs. They're not all that amazing. They're not groundbreaking, and yet they're going for these insane prices. And part of it, I believe, is due to an artificial bubble being made. Part of the reason people want them is because people want them, if that makes sense. People are getting cues that, holy crap, everybody wants this knife. And it artificially in their mind starts to be like, oh, this is my grail, this is amazing, I really want one of these, it's worth this money. And, you know, that definitely happens. It's like branding. You know, why are certain brands cooler than others? It's not because the actual product is better, it's cool because people say it's cool. So there's definitely a lot of that going on. And unfortunately, that's kind of the dark side, but I really don't see a way around it. It's going to happen. A lot of makers do what they can to make things as fair as possible. in terms of lottery and getting their knives out. And I think a lot of makers also realize that they want to be around when the storm's gone, when the bubble shrinks back down. They still want to be making knives. They still want a fan base. So they know if they start abusing some of these things and jacking their prices up just to make a quick buck now, that in the long run it'll probably hurt their knife career. So that's it. I think I crammed everything I wanted to say. You guys take it easy.